Hello there. Right, it's time for Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, 3M4, 4M1, Fight in the Dungeon. Music by John Williams, orchestrated by Herb Spencer. I've kind of cut the entire sequence a little bit short because it sort of runs into lots of segues and things. So, and this was incredibly difficult to put together because of the fact that there are so many edits, jumping around from original material to things where they add half a beat or subtract half a beat from somewhere and add it to somewhere else, and there's so many cuts and edits in this particular thing. So and even with all of that, you still get sort of artifacts. So for example, here we actually hear a trumpet, but that's because it's been cut from somewhere else. But in live performance, you just wouldn't do that. So it's about as accurate as it can be in terms of the film version. But of course, there's bits of material that sort of, because of the nature of John Williams's modular composition, shall we say, in these sort of action cues, or sort of quasi-action cues. Well, it is an action cue, actually. You can sort of piece things together, and it's actually quite interesting to think that, actually, you can kind of get away with it. There are some sort of strange bits where, you might sort of hear no music, or sort of just percussiveness, where actually, probably if you're rescoring it, you would probably fill it with actual pitches and notes and that sort of thing. So there are sort of elements of that. But we also find, in terms of tonality, lots of different things going on. So it starts, and I will go through all of this, but just a quick view of this. So here I've got sort of octatonic T2. So in other words, the octatonic scale, but starting on D. Doesn't mean it's D octatonic. It just means it uses those notes from that particular octatonic transposition. So in fact, that whole thing is octatonic, but then it kind of it riffs away. And this is sort of, John Williams's jazz nature, is that he'll use that as a springboard to then do something which is not strict. And I think this is the difficult thing. If you're trying to do it yourself, is that the temptation is just have a big scale of octatonics and just use any pitch of that octatonic scale. And that's it. And you don't have to think about anything else. But it's not as simple as that. And you need to think about the fact that you can use that as a springboard to do something else. So, for example, here, there's a little riff of an 0134, which is an octatonic element. But then it goes into a pattern which is not exact pattern. So again, it's a bit of a riff. So there's all sorts of that going on. Then we've got sort of minor, sort of C minor, but it's not quite, because it's got things like F sharps in it and stuff like that, but not always, because it's also got F natural in, so it sort of changes. Then we've got sort of C octatonic, but we don't really know because there's a pedal E flat. But some of the sequences are sort of octatonic, some aren't. So again, quite difficult to sort of analyze. Then we've got sort of block chordal planing, where he actually goes into a tonality, which is basically that sort of idea. So C minor with a sharp 4, like that. And that just is used as a springboard to then add other notes to it as well. So we get sort of related pitches, which are all sort of probably, from his point of view, sort of jazz related things, that sort of idea. But they actually do relate to other sorts of chords. In this case, actually a sort of hexatonic subset. But then we get pure jazz in things like that, which is typical sort of, you could almost take it out and put it in a samba, or sort of, Latin American sort of thing. So we got sort of, a bit of 3 bars of jazz. Then we get sort of double harmonic things, which can be really confusing because it doesn't seem to relate to anything else that we've had before, particularly. So this sort of idea, it's all tritone sort of based, basically. But then we've got sort of other pedal notes going on as well. So again, really complicated. Then we've got a sort of French 6 motif, which is completely taken out of any context in terms of sort of regular resolution. It's not used as a resolution. It's not used as a functional chord. Basically, it's a sort of a coloured chord or a chord of colour. So then we've got lots of other pedals, more with this sort of block chordal stuff. Then we get F pedals with pan-triadic chords. In other words, other chords which don't necessarily relate to each other. Sort of sometimes they're chromatic mediants, I suppose you could say, because of going up to G sharp, A flat. It's just an N harmonic bit, so we get that sort of idea as well. But they're using actual root position chords instead of that sort of neo-Riemannian type of sequence or transformation rather. Then we've got other bits where we go back to our sort of C minor sharp 4 type thing with notes which are picked out from the chord, which is typical technique. And in fact, that's all repeated. Then we go into sort of G pedal with pan-triadic chords again, but now with wrong note bass going on as well. So for example, here we've got G. So we get sort of momentary little bits of sort of, half dim sevenths and that sort of thing going on. Then we've got, classic JW type stuff. So 2 chords of minor second apart, which is a classic John Williams thing to do. That sort of thing. So G flat and F, or F sharp and F. So what else? We've got the major minor 7th territory, which is a typical sort of John Williams thing to do as well. What else? More wrong note bass. Then we get into this sort of bass sequence with the 4th theme. So 4th theme in B, and then dyads, which then allows you to sort of do whatever you want to do to go wherever you need to go. In this case, it's actually a hexatonic B chord. But again, it's a little riff. It's not necessarily he's using that as a springboard to go somewhere else. With a wonderful, in fact, probably one of the most superb harmonic sequences of this particular cue, which is this one. I'm just going to play it on the piano. Brilliant. And then that's used as a sort of modulatory tool. Incredible, really, when you think about it. But again, using this sort of C minor sharp 4, this time with a major 7th. I can't play it, playing it with the wrong hand. So it's basically that sort of thing. Then just a dyad. Then going to A flat, which is really extraordinary. And then more hexatonic work. Then it goes into Luke's theme in C major, but everything else is sort of, doing that. And then we got sort of C minor descending, type sort of thing. Then it goes into our C pedal, little shifts with wrong note bass. With sort of, polychordal stuff. Particularly here, where we've got a semitonal shift to a sort of D Hungarian minor type area. But then this is doing something completely different, which is in sort of really B flat minor in this particular bit. In fact, I'm going to write that in. Question mark, because it's sort of going against the prevailing harmony. Have I written that properly? I don't think I have. I think I have, but it's just obscured by other things. So there we go. So I know I'm flitting around a bit, so apologies. You will get to see all of it in one go. But just then we're in Hungarian harmonic minor territory with a D pedal. So notice that there's quite a lot of pedal work going on the way, going all the way. Then it really sort of ramps up. We got this sort of G going down to E flat. Is that G based? I suppose it probably is. But it just keeps changing chord every half a bar, because we got that sort of F sharp minor E, which is a You know, the extraordinary sort of chord, again, sort of quite jazz orientated. It could be an E flat 9, sus sharp 4, in fact, or sus sharp 11. And that just keeps going, and pretty much goes all the way with all of this sort of filigree that we get over the top, which is usually just scalic tones derived from whatever chord they're in. So, for example, you can see G minor here. Those are all notes in G minor in terms of the scale of G minor. C sharp minor. But then we got that with a sharp 4, actually, is what it is. So we've got little bits of filigree, but it's ingenious how it's, you know, it actually has a sort of sense of melodic design where it sort of shifts down by a semitone and then keeps going up. Which is wonderful. That keeps going, and then we've got an ascending sequence going, but it's not quite there, and it's actually 12 tone, amazingly, but it's just chromatic really rather than atonal in terms of 12 tone stuff. With little bits of pattern, and they're all sort of, you know, deliberately using, you know, all of these sorts of intervals. You know, going to major sevenths. And then we've got, again, the sort of diminished fifth. So I've noticed that he, you know, he'll riff on those. And again, there doesn't seem to be any sort of, you know, theoretical design necessarily. It's just literally he's taking a line for a walk or taking the interval for a walk and seeing where it goes. Notice also that even in there we've also got that sort of tritone idea. It's interesting because, you know, he uses the tritone in lots of different ways. In this case, quite often he uses it as a sort of, you know, quite a discordant or a, basically sort of discordant melodic interval. But he doesn't always, but in this case he does. And then we've got more sort of wrong note bass, this time sort of G minor with a major seventh. Going into that, you know, really extraordinary sort of chords, very lardy here. Typical sort of wrong note bass and typical sort of Williams style stuff going on as well. I don't know why I did that. If I change that to that, you'll see that it is C sharp minor. But we've also got that E sharp as well, so it's a C sharp major minor. But with a C as well. So yeah, it's sort of interesting how sometimes these are written. More sort of trumpet, which is sort of just, you know, coming in there with trombones. Quite a weak trombone sound, unusually. This is a sort of, you know, probably the most puzzling bit of orchestration here, where it sort of almost dies out. It goes so high. Notice there are no horns on there at all. And this is just trombones going up to really high B, and it does sound a bit pinched. You can't really hear it very clearly, and even the first and second trumpets get a little bit drowned out by all of the stuff going on with the strings at that particular point. At least they do on the recording that we have. And then it just sort of ends from C to A flat minor with a major seventh. Nice chromatic mediant shift again, and then ends on a C pedal. That's when the next cue, Gordon Langford's cue, takes over and we get sort of more timpani work. This is just an overview, by the way. That happens, we get this wonderful sort of phased up ARP synth at that point, sort of quite prominent. And then really unusual sort of harmon mutes on the trombones, so it sounds really quite peculiar. But really remarkable sort of chord sequence at that point as well, sort of minor sixth chords, minor with a major seventh chords, you know, all of the sort of things we're used to seeing, minor with a major seventh, you know, very common sort of things. And then this sort of very strange bit where you're not quite sure whether it's in F or C, because we've got both going on. So it's probably in F, but it's got a lot of dominant pedal in there. Goes into a sort of C sharp minor area, and then pretty much ends on C sharp. So in terms of sort of tonal design, yeah, there's just so much going on. So how do we make a start? How do we make head or tail of it? Let's try and like fill up the space as much as we can so we can see all the information in one go. I'm going to keep saving things just in case the computer sort of goes a bit strange. So this is just, I've done what I call an extended reduction in terms of trying to show, generally speaking, I go wind, trumpets, horns, trombones. This is usually reserved for things like harp and piano and stuff like that. That's always the strings. Then I put timpani below that and then percussion below that, just so that it kind of looks a little bit like the old John Williams sketches themselves on those sort of little, 4-stave things. Because there's a lot of information going on here. You can clearly see that the horns are duplicating what the strings are doing, and that's a sort of nice technique where you get pizzicato something in the strings, which then heighten the attack of the note performed on something else. So in this case, it's horns. So I'll try and go through little bits of orchestration stuff as we go along. So in other words, here we got horns, and then we got sort of pizz something. Notice obviously the because they're doing that, we can't have anything else on there, and it'd be too high for the double basses. Like that. You might also put piano on there as well, or even harmonics as well. I would have probably put little harp harmonics, except the fact that they're going to ring out. So maybe a prédilatoire or something like that might be just a bit overkill. And this is sort of one of the interesting things that sometimes, there's no time to do all this sort of Revellion stuff. You just have to be expedient and get to the heart of things as quickly as possible. So we've got the initial idea, which is all based on this sort of octatonic thing. So it's all of those notes of the D octatonic scale, but as I said before, it doesn't start on D, and in fact it starts on C, but with an E flat pedal. So let's be watching out for pedals, because it's interesting. Even in this first page, we've got an E flat pedal which goes there. Then we've got a sort of D pedal which takes over from here. Then nothing. I suppose you could just say it's a sort of B pedal. Not really, it's just one beat. Then we've got G's going on, but also notice that we've also got C's going on all the way through. So if you notice the C there, and then it lasts until there, up until we get to E flat. And notice that the C, the E flat sort of takes over, and quite often he prepares a new tonality with a note from the previous beat. It's a sort of pivot note, really. So I wonder whether there's more to it in those sort of pedal things, where he's creating sort of quite smooth harmonic progressions, but of course they don't, it sounds very peculiar, if you see what I mean. But there's some continuity. So just to recap, E flat's there, D's there, a little bit of B there. Then we got, although the bottom note's G at that point, it's a very discordant, jazz, typical sort of atonal chordal jazz type sort of stuff. I've seen that so many times. This sort of type of figuration. I don't know what it's called, because I haven't seen anything that kind of says what it is, but it could be just that, a sort of sharp 4 sus or something like that, maybe chordal voicing. Anyway, but the point is we got a C pedal going there, which gives it some basis of continuity. So we still get that type of idea, this sort of little 3/3 voice thing, or you could even argue that it's a sort of alpha chord type thing. And in fact, there is a G there, so it sort of fills that function. And then we've got the D sharp turning into the E flat, that C pedal going into... So a lot of continuity is basically what I'm saying. Because it happens so quickly. This is what it sounds on Note Performer. Yeah, so I think there's a lot to be said for these pedal points. These sort of, sometimes they're bass pedals, sometimes they're inner pedal movements, sometimes they're inner part pedals. Because I think that's sort of a way of linking the different information that he's got. So yeah, so what he's got here is lots of also disparate sort of rhythmic devices, and again, it's a sort of easy thing to sort of figure out, to not concentrate on rather. So if we think about the beats, bum ba 1 2. So in other words, going from 2 to 3. But of course, look at where this starts. It's not on the beat. So there's a lot of things which are not starting at the beginning of the bar. Just in terms of the rhythmic design. Bum bum bum. 1 2 3. Bum ba 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 bum ba. Something like that. So there's a lot of counterpoint going on. There's a lot of counterpoint going on, and you can try and pick it out. Just let's have a look at those little bits. Like that. And it's real gestural composition. Dum, 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 dum. You know, to come up with that is an intriguing thing. You know, a little quintuplet, digga 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 da ba. And even here, it doesn't have any sort of orchestration. The only orchestration is that sort of, when I mean orchestration, I mean sort of blending of things. So the only thing is that pizzicato with the horns. There's nothing doubling anything. So you get this real clarity going on. Trombones pretty much on their own with that pedal, don't forget, in the E flat. Notice a lot of trem strings. You know, all of those string parts are basically either trem or filigree. If you look at just the violin 1 part, ignore the way it looks on the page. Sorry about that. But lots of trem, double time, you know, stuff scampering, lots of filigree, trem there. Then the sort of more percussive stuff, but only for a few bars. Trem, lots of stuff. Again, col legno, so percussive stuff, percussive things. Trem, more trem, more trem, more trem. A little bit of hammering out stuff, more sort of double time stuff, semiquavers. Then we get into, you know, unison strings territory. Get rid of that. No need to see that. So that's the most sort of melodic bit, is that sort of really gnarly sort of atonal. That sort of thing. So that's the most sort of violin-y bit that we get. Just a pedal, more trem, and then this is all sort of harmonic stuff right at the end. But that's completely different style because it's then not in an action cue at that point. So it's interesting just sort of going through just even one part just to see what it looks like. What should I be writing? I should be writing lots of trem, lots of sort of filigree stuff, lots of scales, that sort of thing, and how they sort of coincide with each other. So the next little bit, as I said, we got this sort of atonal jazz moment. But even this is sort of quite interesting. Because it sort of relates a little bit to that. So in terms of the notes, the intervallic pitches, so we've got that sort of octave from the A flat and then a semitone off it. Like that, but then it sort of cuts out. And there's a little hint of that here, but it's a bit different. Because the notes afterwards are not an octave. He would have done that, but he doesn't do that. And it could be because that would run into the E flat of that. Maybe his harmony came first. Again, using that little quintuplet idea. Is that from there, for example? Not sure. And notice here we got sort of sextuplets, quintuplets all at the same time. Of course, the wind is just doing exactly what the strings are doing if you have a look at that. So they are doubling at that point. Flute, piccolo, clarinet at that point. 45. Let's just go to that. Yeah. And notice how the viola sort of comes in when it needs to in terms of the register. Yeah, really, really stupidly fast. But it's all scalic. And generally speaking, there's no gapping. In terms of there's no sort of gap between the notes. But that's not always the case, because look at here. And also that's quite awkward. Da-dee-dum. And there's gapping here. But it's small scale. It's not doing a complete sort of run of something, whereas here it is doing a complete run of something. But obviously it's easier on the violin because your fingers are closer together. So that's why there's less gapping in the strings at that point. So there's a consideration even at this early stage of sort of composition. And by the way, I haven't even talked about what's going on in the film yet. It's just too much to go on. But you know, consideration of how easy it is to play. And how exciting it is to play as well. Notice also even chordal stuff has a rhythmic design. So like sort of that idea. I just played the wrong note, sorry. Like that, basically. Not sure what that's doing there. I think that's just a little error. Yeah, just so much going on in that first page. And I've talked for a long time just about one page so far, and then another 17 pages to go. So we'll speed up from now. One of the great little bits of orchestration. So here we've got horns, and we've got trills in the strings, and you get this really nice sort of almost buzzing type of sound. It's a really fun bit of design. So here we've got all the strings, we've got little bits of harp which are picking up those notes, and then we've got sort of horns of 6 just doing, you know, 2 on each part, and we get this wonderful yeah, and it's just a wonderful sort of way of having that sort of nice mid-range buzz. You know, tremolo. Notice also that the initial attack is sort of accented a little bit as well. The harp picks out the notes, which is to help with the accent at that point. We've also got you know, things basically in muted brass, so that will also help with that sort of buzzing, sort of bee-like sound, basically. We've got more pedal, so the pedal helps it along. In terms of the pitches, the upper pitch, the upper voice 1 is quite easy to follow. It's just a chromatic leap up, basically, and follows the same sort of transpositional design as well. The lower part is much more difficult to pick out. So it's a mixture of some octatonic pitches there, but it doesn't at the beginning. But notice how we've got our little tritone coming. Then we've got diminished seventh, another tritone. Then it actually goes to an E at that point. Could be because it's really discordant with that E flat. Like that. Because if it was in D, it doesn't... You've then got to repeat the D because that would go D. So I don't know, that could be a reason. Then we've got these amazing sort of cluster chords, 415. You know, it's basically the last sort of 4 notes of a chromatic harmonic scale, rather. And also, it's sort of picking out some of those notes. And then an F natural, which doesn't appear anywhere, by the way. So, yeah, sometimes it's sort of quite confusing to go, well, how does he come up with those particular notes? Because they sound good to him. That there's no, again, there's no sort of theoretical, well, at least not a theoretical thing that I can think of, because it doesn't fit. So the answer is that it's purely sort of improvised, basically. a sort of feel, a natural feel for what works. And he probably, you know, it could be that he tried different notes, but once something's gnarly enough, that's kind of it. Then we've got little bits of sort of wind, which again they all come off the beat. 1, 2, 3, ba, like that. Notice usually there's sort of xylophone and piano and that sort of thing on those. So that's 51. Let's go to that. Where are we? Yes. So it's all of this sort of stuff here. Xylophone, wind. I'll show you the wind parts just so you can see what's going on. Yeah, and also nice little bit of orchestration. Notice that piccolo just drops out after there. It doesn't sort of engage with the D, possibly because it would be too piercing at that point. But the E-flat clarinet is doing that. And then we've also got oboes and clarinets basically all together in unison, giving it that really nice mid-range sound. Like that. Clarinet reinforces the flute. Like that. And in terms of where things are here, this chord here, we've got the obviously stuff at the top, the B flat, but then we got B flat, then we got the A, so we've got flute, then clarinet, then oboe as well, and then cor anglais. Also, that I should have pointed out that that's also there. Sorry, the E flat clarinet, the second flute. Then clarinet. Notice there's no need to put that discord in different voices because he wants a discord there. That's the whole point of it. So we then move on to here. Originally, bars 18 to 13 were then cut. Well, not quite cut, but they were sort of repositioned. And then it cuts into, because it was... so there's half a beat missing from this, but this is where we get our sort of block chordal planing. So it goes from pedal C, continues on a pedal C. So let's try to put that in. So this is pedal C, so just following the pedal. It's got that continuity with the C, which goes into this sort of block chordal planing. So a very simple, typical voicing of Williams. So if we take C, E flat, and then F sharp or G flat, and then G, let's put that fifth from the root into the bass line. And then we get that nice major seventh distance. There, which is rather fun. And that is it, I think. It's sort of, you know, you could say it's harmonically, octatonically derived, but actually, you know, often it doesn't necessarily have octatonic stuff going on around it. In this case, there isn't. It's just that pedal C, which sort of keeps going. But then we get this sort of really extraordinary bit here where we get, an A flat minor with a major seventh and a sharp 4 over B. So these notes. Like that. There we go. I can't play it on my keyboard because I've run out of space. But without the B, except the B is kind of there. So again, I'm not quite sure whether the chord is correct, but there we go. It's sort of 4/8 here, but then 5/22 with the B. And interestingly enough, a minor chord with a major seventh and a sharp 4 is the thing that we've already seen, because of course if you think about this minor chord with a sharp 4, you would add a major seventh. That actually ends up being the same chord, weirdly. So there is a sense of continuity there, and then we also get this bit here where we've got a minor chord with a major 7th sharp 4, so there's also that going on, but in a different key area. This time A flat and then E tritone apart again. So I'll try and do this like that. Notice the separation of trumpets in the upper extension and horns on the lower extension. Then the chord becomes almost like a sort of little subset of hexatonic, this time D sharp major minor. So that means that does that. And then we've got a C, sort of add 6 as well, which is what's going on here, which is extraordinary. But again, it's probably more of a sort of jazz thing than, you know, a design of going, you know, quite where I will go in terms of what chords I'm going to use. But, you know, this is a little bit more gnarly, I suppose, than this bit, which, although it sounds gnarly, again, is quite a typical chord. This one is a less typical chord, this particular bit. Like that, with the G as well. So then we've got this sort of quintal chords. In terms of pedal things, that C sort of dries out. There's nothing really that's, you know, there particularly. I suppose you could say that that whole chord is a pedal at that point. Then we get that E flat, but that's kind of the same as the D sharp. So then it goes into back to C, another sort of tertiary shift possibly. But then we got B at the top this time. That pedal takes over. Then we've got, as I played right at the beginning of the thing, this piano solo vibes. Yeah, very, very much jazz, with all the tuned drums and the timp going on as well. Really quite extraordinary. So after that, we then get two very common atonal chords. So this idea, so we've got that sort of 3-3, and then we've got that sort of 3-5 type sort of chord going on too. It's a sort of E bass double harmonic, that sort of idea, but it doesn't sound like it, but he is picking out those notes. That continues a little bit, and then we get the sort of elephantine whip, almost like a sort of elephant sort of trunk type sort of noise. And this is a sort of really intriguing riff. So actually, if we look at the actual notes from here, it's sort of an upper extension of a French sixth, which is really weird. But it sort of seems to work. It sort of feels augmented, which is what it is, sort of almost larger than life. So I think this was the thing that had originally would have been here, from the C. So we'd have had, sorry, from the C, and then it would have been a tertial shift there anyway. So that's an interesting thing. So an A-based riff, dum, dum, bum, almost sort of Imperial March-ish, but doesn't really have any hint of that. A lot of percussion going on, cowbells and cymbals and bass drums and anvils and all sorts of different things going on. Then we've got more of this sort of block chordal stuff, but actually there's no extensions on this bit. Then a really intriguing little bit of orchestration. So apart from all of this trumpet stuff where we've got you know, a very irregular rhythm, and notice how irregular this whole section has been. Very few times have we got any consistency in terms of, you know, beats. So yes, we got 4/4, but then 3. 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 5 2 3 1 2 did it but 1 2 4 1 2 3 4 2 3 4 1 2. You know, there's the ostinato. There isn't one. It's very irregular, and this is sort of another feature of the rhythmic style of Williams as well, that things are often off the beat, they come at different points, unexpected places, and when there is some form of regularity, there's other things to upset it as well. So that's a good example of that. So here we've got sort of an interesting thing, as I said, orchestrationally. Look at those bassoons and contra in the strings. So this is, where are we? Bar 70 something, 73 I think it is. Let's go to that and just have a look at what's going on. So just on its own, we've got contra bassoon, bassoon 1, bassoon 2, bass clarinet's just doing the same thing as bassoon 1. Yeah, sort of very Ravellian. And now with the trombones, they're kind of colouring that long chord. Yeah, fantastic. I mean, a really wonderful bit. And then I think we've then got the cello and the double bass to add depth to that. Yeah, doesn't do the same thing twice at that point. That could just be because there's an edit going on, and I think there is actually at that point. But again, a really intriguing device. I haven't seen that orchestration feature before actually in Williams, so that's quite an interesting one, with bassoons, contras sort of doing that and extending the power, I guess, of that chord. We've got Cole Legno stuff. Again, the notes are sort of irrelevant at that particular point. Horns and trombones together pretty much in unison. You get this really powerful sound. Then back to what we had before, absolutely identical, is a complete copy. So I'm going to skirt over it. This is where we find the bassoons actually extending a little bit more. This time we've got, you know, it's in a different key. So more those sort of chromatic mediants and things like that, pan-triadic stuff. And I guess you can call it wrong note bass a little bit. And then really weird F add 4 over G, which is very jazz indeed, and then goes into this sort of really extraordinary bit. Just have a look at the here. It's like a weird Alberti bass, but against something at the top. And that reminds me a little bit of the, you know, the Jabba's minuet and trio that we had a little bit early on, with these sort of, you know, that bit, because it's all filled with the wrong. It's all filled with those wrong notes, deliberately wrong notes. It's a sort of Stravinsky type technique, I suppose, and also a sort of vaudeville technique, really. So really, really interesting. Here we got more minor chords with a sharp 4. That seems to be a thing to him. And everything happens incredibly quickly as well. That's the other thing. So it's sort of 84 at that point. So I think we're here. Yeah, I remember hearing it, saying, wow, that's really very, very quick indeed. I'm not even sure that it's possible to play. That'd be incredibly difficult to play on a violin because of the string crossing. You'll be in sort of second position possibly, or third position. D, so first finger on the E string, third finger, then fourth finger. Actually, it's not too it's not too bad actually. I think it's just going from a 3 to a 4. just is slightly awkward. But I mean, you know, any professional can play that. Actually, it was just interesting just to sort of momentarily see what it was. Possibly difficult for the percussion as well, you know, with everything in time, but the triangle sort of disguises it all, I suppose. So we got that wonderful chord at this point again, so G flat, and then here like that. Again, that's sort of a typical sort of jazz chord, but also a typical John Williams chord. And then there's all sorts of jumping around. We get this sort of really weird bit where we just go semitonal shift, and it jumps. So that is an edit. That's another edit. So C minor with a major 7th. So we've gone from our sort of sharp 4 type minor chords to major 7 minor chords, and those sort of keep going. Lots of a little French 6th, cheeky in there, with a little octatonic subset. Otherwise, this is usually doing something that picking out the notes of this. Notice how the clarinet and the harp very, very often pair together in Williams as well. Let's have a quick look at that. 88. If we can. There we go. Yeah, so it's all of this stuff. It's quite common for that to happen. This time, both clarinets. Like that. With, obviously, ringing out, I would imagine. With a little LV sign going on there. Otherwise, you'd be damping. Then it jumps to bar 69 of the original. Notice we're at bar 90 at this point. So, you know, it just sort of, again, it's jumped up, you know, a few bars. So we can't really sort of talk about tertiary shifts and stuff like that because it's all edited. But we're back into more pedal work. So a little 2-bar module, which is sort of what we've, you know, material that we've had before. And in a sense, there's quite limited material. There's little blocks of, you know, stuff. So if I stop there for a little bit, because we're then getting to the fourth theme at that point. You know, the first bit is obtuse in terms of the material that's used. Really, it's just this sort of dee-da, da, ba, da, da. It's that stuff with the quintuplets. That's kind of it. That is something that doesn't ever reappear again. This does. That sort of thing. So that reappears. We've also got this sort of, you know, Hoth battle. We've then got this idea. So there we're then back into that seems to be a sort of riff on that. That's again part of the sort of Elephantine stuff. Back to the block chordal. So in terms of the material that we've had so far, it's quite limited actually. You know, he has limited it. He hasn't done sort of anything. It all has some reference to something that's happened before. But now we do move into something a little bit different. So here we've got the fourth theme, which is unusually on trombones and horns all playing in unison at the same time. So that's 93. So talk about separation of colour. I mean, you can't really get much more separated than that. I don't think anything else is playing the fourth theme. Yeah. So typical separation. So all of the main melody is in the brass. The only exception is the trumpets, which have this sort of little bit, sort of secco, sort of little punctuation marks. We've also got this interesting thing here where those are just single, you know, notes. Here we've got sort of double timed. So typical rising melodic ascent, which heightens tension. we've then got a little bit of a counter, well, I suppose, yeah, sort of counter melody to all of that. Like that. All going into that that force theme, which is in B minor, basically. The scale is an interesting one because it's a hybrid scale. It could be all sorts of different things. And this is where it could be an octatonic scale, but it could also be an altered scale as well. So it could also be that as well. And that's, again, his sort of jazzing riff on something as well. Notice there's actual chords rather than any extensions at this point because of the force theme going on there. The rising theme, it then goes into dyadic territory, which is interesting. So that's trumpets and trombones essentially playing both notes. Again, we've got this sort of hexatonic idea. We don't even need the E. We don't even need that, but it is there, the E flat or the D sharp, you can call it. You also notice that the first three notes of that are also part of that 3/3 atonal chord that we had before. So there's similarity between that and the octatonic scale, and also, the harmonic minor scale. So 3/3, interestingly, is a chord that's used so frequently, that sort of alpha chord. It's used in a way of linking a harmonic minor, a hexatonic, and an octatonic, as well as other things. Yeah, and then he has these sort of really almost strange motifs. It's almost sort of hackneyed cliche. In a sense, but then we get one of the most superb harmonic sequences. So we get a G pedal which goes all the way through. So remember I was talking about pedal notes and how important they are with Williams as providing a sense of continuity when he's got all of these other sorts of tonality going on. So in other words, we've got that B minor, but then it's going to hexatonic territory, then and we've got a sort of pedal both doing that, and then actually the G takes over. Notice that there's still an F sharp there, so it's always like a little pivot moment at that point. Then notice that G pedal, C minor major 7th with a sharp 4, G minor with a major 7th, and then C minor but with a G. So no C really, it's just actually just implied. Then a 3/3 goes to A flat. So we're expecting it possibly to go to C, but then he basically does a sort of I've called it a semitonal shift, but in some ways it's actually tertial shift, because if we imply C kind of goes up to, it goes down to A flat, unless you think that the whole thing is sort of G based or even B based. Even if it was, it still goes down a tertial shift. So it's a sort of really interesting sort of a modulation at that point. Let's just listen to it on the piano. Yeah, I mean, it does feel a semitonal shift, actually up. So again, going up, heightening tension. This time we've got an A flat augmented chord with a major 7th and a sharp 9, which is actually hexatonic. So we got a sort of hexatonic moment at that point. Interesting little harmony here in the tubas and trombones, or actually just the trombones. So we've got the hexatonic A flat, we've got our E there, we've got the F here, which is not part of the hexatonic bit, and then we've got a B. So it's almost like sort of something else has intruded upon that. So it becomes really discordant. So it's almost like a sort of opposition to this as well. So we get a sort of 7-note scale, but then with some notes missing as well. Yeah, it's almost sort of, he almost bebop scales other things by providing little chromaticisms, which I find really, really interesting. Again, it's his sort of jazz temperament, I would imagine. And then we're into Luke's theme. And notice how the rhythm of it is just sort of quavers rather than that sort of triplet. C sus4 is a sort of typical. But then suddenly we're into ostinato territory. However, ostinato territory lasts only 4 bars in C. Let's just do a little thing about this. Then it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bars of C sharp. Then it goes into D with how many bars of that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it changes. Suddenly it then changes every few bars or so. Here, that's the most consistent bit, where we have that G pedal, which goes on for quite a few bars, actually. I don't know quite how many. Let's just have a quick count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 bars. So again, everything's sort of slightly irregular, which is important because the whole point of ostinatos is to make them irregular. As soon as you regularize it, you make it more regular, you switch off. It becomes passive, not active. So here, just in terms of, actually it's probably easier to go to 106. So lots of edits, by the way, at this point. So let's go to 106, just play it from there. Let's highlight just the brass. Yeah, so the extent of that is just a very short ostinato segment, where we've got more of this sort of cascades, these little sort of trumpet fanfares as well. You know, more wrong note bass. Interesting that he doesn't use a minor D flat. I would have probably used a minor bum 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 bum, but I think it's because he's already got that there, because otherwise you'd have to have there, and that would then change the chord here. You don't get your wrong note bass, so that's why he's got a major D at that point, not a D flat, because then it's sort of not gnarly with the C sharp. Notice also a little bit of imitation in the trombones, and little fragmentary, you know, all of these sort of little fanfare bits, and then some nice filigree going on. And basically just D harmonic minor, because we're going to D harmonic. But notice that again, he puts the key of the place that he's about to get to in the previous bar. There's something that connects the previous bar with the shift bar. So what I'm saying is that here, that is sort of D Hungarian minor, or D based minor. He's putting the D there, even though everything else is doing that. With a semitonal shift. Again, a sort of really interesting device. And here he's starting on the G, which is that tritone. And then puts an extra note in because of the chromatic movement to get the leading note. Because he doesn't want that. He wants that. So here we got a really interesting bit at this point where We've got a semitonal shift to D Hungarian minor, kind of Hungarian, but we got our D pedal anyway. I think I've called it Hungarian because of the G sharp going on. But then we've got B flat minor and the trumpet. All sorts of really weird sort of chords going on. A lot of these are part of the you know, design of what's going on at this point. So we've got a little bit of ostinato. But it doesn't last more than one bar, so it's not really an ostinato. And then it changes again, this whole sort of phrase. Yeah, completely opposite key. So in here, we've got sort of black note, white note stuff. We've also got sort of D minor going on, but then the arpeggios are doing what the chords are doing. And then we've got to have C sharp. So it's a feature that is used in Raiders of the Lost Ark, actually. So all of the filigree, arpeggiated things, are just being part of whatever's going on. Notice here, because of the chord here, all we've got is an implied D minor bit, which is why it's there, not C sharp minor. Otherwise it'd be like that. Sorry. E flat F G. So then we've got that going on, and then it goes into this juxtapose like that. And a really extraordinary sort of bit of chordal design. So yeah, I said it sounds a bit more like E flat 9 sus sharp 4, and it's this bit I'm talking about. So it just changes, so it repeats a lot and then just changes over the last sort of few little bits. But basically that's what it is. Again, the chords here are just doing what they're supposed to do, just picking out some of the notes. Of the top. That's all that's happening. So filigree wise, it's just picking out, again, scale degrees, which are part of the basic chord as well. So just note that the basic chord does change at this point, at 1 3 1, where we've got a sort of G minor with a sharp 4 as well. Like that, and that reappears 4 times, and then we've got a lovely octatonic scale in G, and then we get a B flat D dyad, sort of really weird sort of moment at that 1 3 6. It's a sort of yeah, a sort of break in play basically. Let's just go from there. So all of that sort of imitation, basically. Then we're into an ascending sequence, which is essentially 12 tone. And it essentially goes into a sort of diminished thing up until that note here. Because most composers would have gone like that. So typical sort of gnarly sequence, where again we've got sort of more effective, very low trumpets. Notice how low they are in the thing, but notice there's not much else going on anywhere else. Again, we got that little bit of percussiveness, xylophone, piano, all of that sort of thing. Also got tuned drums as well. Yeah, the gnarly wrong note bass sequence as before, but this time we've got a pedal. So again, the sort of pedals are interesting because they do provide continuity. Here we got sort of two really, because it's both things. And also, in a sense, it's a sort of B flat augmented. But because we got the G, it's actually G minor with a major 7th. Like that. I can't even play it on the piano, but it does actually lie under the fingers quite well. So again, probably a thing that he came up with on the piano. A pedal goes towards the end, and then the last bit, like that. With our G as well, A flat minor with a major 7th, ends on C. So the very last bit I won't really bother too much about, because there's not really a lot to say about it, apart from the sort of rather interesting harmony sequence here. So once we've heard the ARP synth, we've got all of this, all of those sort of minor chords. This is interesting, this sort of bit here. It's really sort of quite sad. Lots of 6th chords and minor chords with the major 7th. Like that, F minor with a major 7th. Very sort of sad jazz, basically. But really typical of Williams. And then the very, very last bit is that sort of death knell bit. Notice the sort of guillotine, very, very deep sort of field drum, possibly, or actually sort of tenor drum, really. And then we've got this a bit like that. Another typical sort of very simplistic device. At this point, we've got open trombones, which are kind of filling in some of the gaps here. And let's just have a quick look at that. That's 183, I think, or 182. Just right at the end of this particular bit of the cue. Yeah, so interesting. Actually, it's just second violins. Double bass and cellos are always the same. Yeah, sort of a little bit of a sort of Imperial March type sort of thing. Interesting how the timp comes in. There we go. And then wonderful sort of harp gliss right at the very, very end, which is an octatonic scale, essentially. So just filling in the gaps. Yeah, it has a sort of rather strange sort of magical quality to it, I suppose, at that point. And ends in a C sharp minor with a sharp 4, so goes all the way back to the beginning. If you recall, all the way back to the beginning of that video, that sort of sharp 4 stuff. So again, often finishing a cue with some knowledge or some nod to what he had before. Again, it's an absolutely extraordinary piece of work. This one, really, really interesting from anybody who's been following Mark Richards' course, for example, in the action music cue. This is probably one of the best ones to go for in some ways, because it is quite awkward. There's nothing which is, no extended periods of ostinato at all. A lot of pedal notes. So what I'm interested in is, and one thing you might be able to do as composers, is try and experiment with how do you get from octatonic notes to non-octatonic notes? How do you add continuity? And, you know, one of the ways is using pedals. Which pedal do you use? What feels appropriate? Notice that the sometimes the chords can be sort of quite tonally based. Sometimes they can be not tonally based. They can be sort of quartal. They can be that sort of alpha chord as well. Does that give you a sense of continuity? And also, can you make everything as irregular as you possibly can? In other words, that you've got sort of, you know, okay, 2 bars of 2/4, 2 bars of 3/4, then you've got 2/4, then you've got another 3/4, then you've got a little stretch of 4/4, then you've got something else coming on 5/4 with an extra beat. You know, of course, all of these would be coincidental with the film to hit various hit points, of course, which I haven't even gone into. That's another whole different thing. But I just wanted to bring the music to you at this point. So that's it for now. I hope you've enjoyed it, and you know, it's an enormous amount of work, so bear with me. It might be a couple of weeks actually for the next one, just because it takes so long to do. You know, even just sort of putting little accents on things and doing all the slurs, the dots, and you know, working everything out as well takes an enormous amount of time. So thank you so much, and thank you again to my patrons who are just fantastic. Your support is just brilliant. So click and subscribe if you would like to, and I'll see you again very soon.